Justice Department official who appointed a special prosecutor, and the Trump transition team has been ordered to save records related to the investigation. I'll get into it with Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace just moments from now. And the hero homeowner who captured 2 escaped inmates, ending a manhunt that stretched across several states. That and all the day's top stories this hour. And here is the breaking that we are following right now. And a live look now. Let's go to MedStar Hospital in Washington, D.C. And we're about to get an update on Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. I'm Harris Faulkner in today for Shepard Smith. The hospital's head of trauma is set to talk with reporters at any moment now. And the last we heard about the House Majority Whip Scalise, he appeared to be doing a little better, slightly better, but he's still in critical condition. That's what sources told our senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram hours ago. The congressman has had 2 rounds of surgery, but the hospital has reported he will need much more and could be there for some time. Those are their words. 2 days ago, a gunman shot Scalise and 3 others at the GOP charity baseball practice. Earlier today, his widow told reporters she cannot believe what her husband did and offered this apology.
I had no idea this was going to happen. And I don't know what to say about it. I can't wrap my head around it, okay? And I just want my neighbors to be in peace. Sorry that he did this, but there's nothing I can do about it.
Matt Micah, a lobbyist for Tyson Foods, was also shot on Wednesday. He's also in critical condition. His family reported that yesterday. His relatives say he was shot in the chest and arm, and he will also need many surgeries. He's at George Washington University Hospital in D.C. Zach Barth, a staffer for Congressman Roger Williams of Texas, was shot in the leg. Yesterday, he was back at work at the U.S. Capitol. 2 Capitol police officers who were hailed as heroes also injured in Wednesday's attack. Special Agent Crystal Griner was shot in the ankle. Last we heard, she was in good condition at that same hospital as Scalise. And Special Agent David Bailey, who received treatment for a minor injury. And last night, he threw the first pitch at the charity baseball game that went on as scheduled. Doug McElway is live at the hospital in that briefing. He's actually going to join us by phone because we are moments away, so we want to leave you in place where you are, Doug, and get the very latest update. We got a media advisory that the head of trauma would be giving this update.
Right, and this is a key event, Harris, because the hospital has been very sparse with their pronouncements, their public pronouncements of the condition of Mr. Scalise. So we're looking forward to this. This is the first such press conference, and it's going to be with the head of the trauma team here, Dr. Jack Sava. And there's good reason for them to be fairly sparse in their comments, because this was such a mammothly severe injury that was done to the House Majority Whip. Considering the power of a high-speed, powerful bullet like this, it can just devastate human tissue and bone. And we do know that it went into the hip, shattered his pelvis, did a lot of damage to the internal organs in the pelvis area, probably severed some veins and or arteries, given the extent of the bleeding. And I know that's been a major, major problem in the surgeries to date, just trying to stem the bleeding. So hopefully for the first time, we will get an update in some greater detail about exactly what his condition is and perhaps what the prognosis is. Another reason for their being so sparse in their pronouncements is because he was in critical condition. And anybody who is suffered a major gunshot wound and has undergone major surgery is oftentimes placed in critical condition. But given the extent of the injuries here, it's a situation where you suspect that the hospital doesn't want to get out ahead of itself. They're handling this piece by piece, bit by bit, operation by operation. We know that he's had at least 2 operations and perhaps some other procedures to date, more in store. But from Dr. Jack Sava, we should get a much better idea of what the prognosis is.
All right, Doug, with the facts on site there, and here's one to toss into the mix. So we have just gotten word, Doug, and don't know if you know this in the room, but the news conference has been pushed back by just a few minutes. That's enabling us to bring in our own A-team of doctors here at Fox News so that we can talk about what we learn in the next few minutes. You mentioned stemming the bleeding, that has been an issue for Representative Scalise, for doctors. Perhaps they'll talk about how they are addressing that issue. It is a serious one, as we all know. Doug McElway, we will come back to you as the news warrants. For now, let's move on with also what's making news this hour. President Trump tweeted earlier about the investigation into firing FBI Director James Comey, and that's causing some drama. Here's the tweet. I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt. And sources now tell us the president was referring to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He's been overseeing the Justice Department investigation into Trump's team ties to Russia, potentially, since Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself in March. Remember, there's no evidence, just tossing that in. The Washington Post and New York Times this week reported the newly assigned special counsel, Robert Mueller, is looking into whether President Trump obstructed justice in his conversations with James Comey. Both reports cited anonymous sources. Now Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein is warning Americans to be skeptical about news stories that cite anonymous officials and sources. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live for us at the White House. All right, so a little bit of an alert for fake news there, or what's going on?
Well, Harris, let's dissect that tweet that the president sent out this morning in a couple of different ways. First of all, the very first part of that tweet where he says, I am under investigation, a lot of people immediately leapt to the conclusion that the president was confirming that he is indeed under investigation, potentially for obstruction of justice by the special counsel's office headed up by Robert Mueller. But a source in the Trump legal team, and this is the outside legal team, called me up to say the president was not confirming that he is under investigation. He was merely suggesting the same thing that the Washington Post had been reporting, or at least repeating what the Washington Post had been reporting, but not confirming in any way, shape, or form that he is under investigation. Now let's take the second part of that tweet, and this really is the startling part of it, that the president is now taking aim at his Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. And this really is an interesting development, because the president is pointing out to his Twitter followers, and there are tens of millions of them, what he sees as the hypocrisy of the idea that he, the president, is under investigation for doing what Rosenstein, in his three-page letter, effectively recommended. He didn't exactly say fire Comey, but he did say that the FBI needed to change and needed new leadership, and didn't think that Comey would be able to fulfill that role. And now it raises questions as to whether or not the president may be seeking to get rid of Rosenstein as the Deputy Attorney General. That topic did come up earlier this week in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. Listen to West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin questioning Rosenstein here.
Could you be terminated without cause?
Yes.
And who would appoint your replacement as your position now, Deputy Attorney General?
The president.
So that's a possibility.
Anything's possible, Senator.
At the same time that the president is tweeting about this, there now comes speculation, or at least some reports, that Rosenstein may be the next person to recuse himself in the Russia investigation. The Department of Justice is pushing back hard against that, saying that he would consider doing that maybe if the investigation turned its attention toward him, but there's no consideration of that right now. Department of Justice spokesman Ian Pryor telling me, quote, as the Deputy Attorney General has said numerous times, if there comes a point when he needs to recuse, he will. However, nothing has changed. The president today also taking aim at what he says is an absolute lack of any finding from an investigation that has been going on literally since the day of the election, tweeting, quote, after 7 months of investigations and committee hearings about my, quote, collusion with the Russians, nobody has been able to show any proof. Sad. Harris, what's really bugging the president, though, is that now it seems the special counsel's office is leaking like a sieve.
Leaks and this administration, like a sieve, you say. We'll come back as the news warrants. John, thank you very much. Now, we're getting some more detail, by the way, on that news conference that's coming up. Let's pop that on the screen, because we're going to get an update at MedStar Washington. That's the hospital where House Majority Whip Steve Scalise is after being shot, among others, this past Wednesday. We'll also hear from his chief of staff, in addition to the doctors. So we'll get to learn a little bit perhaps about his family and some other issues I can imagine that the reporters in the room will ask about. So just want to make you aware of that. And also this hour, much more on politics and the news on this Friday. President Trump just signed a rollback of a key Obama legacy point. I'll get into that and much more with Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. Stay close. Chris Wallace. Chris, always good to see you. You know, I guess my first question would have to be, the president has a right to defend himself, right? So when he tweets about these things, I mentioned earlier in the news that it was causing some drama, but he's pointing to facts. There's no evidence. I mean, he's calling it a witch hunt. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, he can do anything he wants, and it's a free country, but it isn't helpful to his legal case because there is some evidence here that would seem to add to the possibility or his liability for obstruction of justice. And the fact is that he is now in that one tweet where he says, I'm now being investigated for obstruction for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Well, we all know, because the president told us in an interview with NBC, that he didn't fire James Comey because of the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He said that he had decided to do that before he even met with the Attorney General and with Rod Rosenstein. So it just seems curious, and it just seems that it would be a lot smarter for him. He certainly has the right to do it, but it would be a lot smarter for him to just stop talking about this particular issue. Not saying he can't talk about health care or taxes or other things. This is a very sensitive issue, and I think most lawyers would say, don't talk any more than you need to.
Well, and aside from the lawyers, the American people have said that what they want, and the reason why they elected him, is to concentrate on the things that matter to their lives. So, I mean, this is a huge, shiny object that's distracting everybody at this point. No doubt the Trump side wants it to go away, but I hear you saying that the attorneys would prefer if he'd stop commenting on it. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about where we are with the leaks now and the Mueller investigation. What in the world is going on with that? And how can it be a fair investigation if it, too, is leaking, as John Roberts put it, like a sieve?
Yeah, it isn't fair. And in some cases, it may even be illegal. But we don't know who's leaking. I mean, there's this implication that it's the special counsel's office that's leaking. Well, we know that the special counsel, his office, has been reaching out to a variety of people. At least we know it from the reports. For instance, the director of national intelligence, Dan Coates, and the head of the NSA, Admiral Mike Rogers.
Right.
Perhaps it's somebody from their offices that has leaked this information. We don't know who's leaking it. It's not fair that they're leaking it, but it really isn't going to interfere with the investigation.
Can I put this out there? Because I'm really wondering, why did Robert Mueller, the head of the special counsel now, head of the Russia investigation, why did he choose to sort of stack the prosecutorial deck with people who have been Democrat supporters, Hillary Clinton supporters? I've been reading about this today, and people can support whomever they want, but is that a problem in terms of the leaks, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, that's a supposition, and I think a big leap to say that those are the folks that are leaking. You don't know that, and I don't know that.
Right.
You can certainly argue about the choice of who he's making. Look, some of that is just pushback by people who don't like this investigation by Robert Mueller. I got to tell you, Robert Mueller, who was the FBI director at 9/11 and then for about 10 or 12 years, has an impeccable reputation.
Absolutely.
And is supported by both the right and the left. And you heard this week when there was even the hint of a suggestion that the president might try to find some way to get rid of Mueller. You heard Republicans like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and a bunch of others saying, absolutely not. They need to let Mueller do his job.
Well, thank you for addressing that, because, I mean, as it sort of comes out and you hear about leaks, well, wouldn't it make sense if people who don't maybe agree with you politically might push back? But you're right. We do not have the facts on that. I just asked the question. Last one is about the discipline of this president and maybe a call for that a little bit and getting back to the issues. I'm wondering what the drumbeat is on Capitol Hill.
Well, the drumbeat, look, I think there are a lot of people who are tremendous supporters of Donald Trump and very much want to see him succeed, who feel that the tweeting, particularly the tweeting about these kinds of issues, which, as you say, don't affect people's lives, they involve him, but they're not about tax reform or health care reform or infrastructure, you know, just wish he'd stop it and that he would focus on doing his job and solving their problems, not worrying about and talking a lot about his problems.
Right. And they tend to step on the news that he's already making. I mean, he just signed legacy reversing, if you will, from President Obama legacy reversing legislation having to do with U.S. policy with Cuba, and that gets stepped on by some of this other stuff.
Well,
I'm going to brag on you now.
I was going to say, let me just quickly say,
Sure.
Harris, I mean, look at our conversation right here. We could be talking about Cuba. We're not. We're talking about this, and the only person who is responsible for that is the president with these very controversial leaks today,
well,
very controversial tweets today.
Right. We are going to talk about it more with the panel and other things, too, but we appreciate your time. So I'm going to brag on you a little bit because this weekend, Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace will talk with Illinois Republican Congressman Rodney Davis, who was on the field during the shooting at the GOP baseball practice this week. Also, Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar on the new political unity in Washington after the shooting and how long it might last. Is it sincere? And the latest on the Russia investigations with one of President Trump's attorneys, Jay Sekulow. That's this Sunday on your local Fox broadcast station. Check the TV listings for the time in your area. Now, here's what we're watching. We're watching for this news conference to pop up on screen there, and for doctors, and we also understand a member of Representative Scalise's team, staff team, to walk up and give us an update both on his condition and possibly answer some questions from the reporters. We're going to take a quick commercial break and come right back to the breaking.
Directly across towards the other hip in what we call a transpelvic gunshot wound. The round fragmented and did substantial damage to bones, internal organs, and blood vessels. I understand he was awake on scene, but by the time he was transported by helicopter to the MedStar Trauma Center, he was in shock. My partners, Dr. Tony Shiflett and Dr. Christine Trankium, saw him in the trauma center with the other doctors and nurses there. They treated him there and quickly brought him to the operating room where we performed surgery. In the operating room, he was in critical condition and received many units of transfused blood for ongoing hemorrhage from multiple locations. He received truly amazing anesthesia care from Dr. Eric Skolnick and Dr. Scott Frank. Due to their great work, we were able to get him through that procedure, and we then took him to the radiology suite where he underwent an additional procedure by Dr. Arshad Khan to further control bleeding. From there, we went to the intensive care unit where he got additional care under the direction of Dr. Chadi Abouasili, and he remains in the ICU today. Yesterday, Dr. Trankium and I did an additional operation, and Dr. Robert Golden, our director of orthopedic trauma, did an operation to repair a broken bone in his leg. The congressman's status remains critical. We are encouraged by improvement in his condition over the last 36 hours. We have controlled the internal bleeding, and his vital signs have stabilized. He will require additional operations to manage abdominal injuries and other bone injuries. Predicting the length of his hospital stay is difficult today. Presumably it will be easier in some days when more time has passed and we have more information. After he leaves the hospital, he will require a period of healing and of rehabilitation. On behalf of the MedStar Trauma Team, I want to thank the special agents on the scene as well as the first responders for everything that they did for those shooting victims. We are all well aware here at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center of all that those folks did to save these people. We here salute their commitment, their dedication, and their skill. I can answer a few questions, but as Donna said, it's possible that we will not be able to answer all the questions due to privacy concerns.
Dr. Salter, just a factual question here. You described multiple procedures. There's been some confusion because many of us are not medical professionals. What is the fair assessment of how many surgeries you had? You talked about it going in and out of the biologic. So what's the best way to characterize these procedures and how many?
Well, there's actually a bit of semantic confusion there, and I leave it to you how to characterize. I think the reason for the semantic confusion is he went from an operation to a procedure that I mentioned in interventional radiology. Typically, we don't call that an operation or a surgery, although really it has many similarities. There's anesthesia, and in many ways it resembles an operation.
Did he come back up from anesthesia between the two?
No. The second possible point of confusion is that yesterday he underwent an operation that involved 2 separate surgical teams. It was in the same room in one continuous sitting with one set of anesthesia, but at first it was my team doing abdominal surgery and then Dr. Golden's team doing orthopedic surgery. So again, the opportunity for confusion about whether you count that as 1 or 2.
And as a medical professional, you would, if you're reading one of our articles, the number you would say would be what to be most accurate?
2.
Thank you.
What are your major concerns going forward at this point in terms of his recovery, and do you expect Mr. Scalise to live in most respects a normal life, and what are the limitations that you foresee based on your experience?
Well, I don't want to get too far out ahead of myself. All of us who care for severely injured patients are very reluctant in the first few days to start predicting which way things can go with all the branches in the road that are to come. Usually, the initial period is about hemorrhage control. And I feel like we've made a lot of progress about that, and hopefully that is not going to be our biggest enemy any longer. Other things to worry about include infections and other complications that come about from intensive care.
And in terms of rehabilitation?
Well, hopefully you'll have an opportunity at some point to maybe talk to Dr. Golden about the orthopedic aspects. I think that we fully expect him to be able to walk, to be able to do, again, I don't want to speak to Dr. Golden, but my understanding is that he will be able to walk and hopefully run. As far as the degree of athletic limitation, I think I will kick all that to Dr. Golden to answer.
Doctor, you kind of addressed this a little bit already, but I think a lot of people heard shot in the hip and then were surprised to hear that he was in critical condition. Can you describe what made these injuries so severe or so difficult to treat?
Well, I think I've thought about that because I was surprised by some of the reports also. I would encourage you to talk to your military medical colleagues about what it means to be shot with a high-velocity rifle in the hip region, because most of us would not even think to consider that a benign wound. As I said, in his case, the major initial risk to life is because of the hemorrhage that results when that bullet travels through blood vessels.
So it's a bleeding.
It's a bleeding thing.
Dr. Selma, has he been conscious at all during his time in the hospital? Has he been able to talk to his family, to any of friends or anything like that? Has he been able to take visitors?
He's been sedated, but we've been able to turn down that sedation enough for him to respond to his family members, and he clearly knows that they're there and appreciates their presence.
Does he seem to understand at all what he's going through at this point?
I don't want to get into the details of what I think he's going through. I think that we're happy to see that he can respond to us and to the family. She has had one operation at this point. Dr. Golden could answer as to whether additional work will be needed.
Bottom line right now, you sound optimistic about recovery.
Well, I like to say it's my job to be pessimistic, and so if you accuse me of being optimistic, I feel bad about that. I feel a lot more confident and a lot more optimistic than I did 2-3 days ago.
How serious of a situation, how would you describe the seriousness of it when he was first here and the risk that he could possibly die?
I would say that when he arrived, he was in critical condition with an imminent risk of death.
How long will he be in the hospital, do you think?
Again, it's too hard to say at this point. Once we get through a few more days, we might be able to prognosticate a little better, but now there are just too many forks in the road and to say when the final day is. He will certainly be in the hospital for a considerable period of time, presumably weeks.
I was surprised to hear you say that you expect him to walk again and even perhaps run again, given the fact that his hip was shattered. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the main support structure of the erect body? And what kind of repair work is done to see that he can walk again?
Well, you're correct. It's a critical piece of support for standing and walking. And again, Dr. Golden would be a better person to answer that question. But our orthopedic trauma surgeons are very good, and they can work miracles.
In that vein, there's no nerve damage or anything like that that would impair?
I think also I will sort of stop at the really detailed assessment of each individual injury. Again, we sort of decided that we weren't going to go quite there today.
I know you can't say for sure, but has there been any thought to downgrade his condition?
I have not given much thought to word choice as of yet. We've been awfully busy. I haven't given much thought to that kind of word choice yet. I have to admit I find that challenging because there's not really strict definitions. Your idea of critical and my idea of critical and Donna's idea of critical are probably all radically different. I think it's sort of a misperception that those terms are well defined, so I usually steer away from them.
You said he was in critical when he came in and imminent risk of death. While he's still in critical, is the imminent risk of death been lifted?
I think that his risk of death right now is substantially lower than when he came in. And certainly, whatever you think of the word critical, he was as critical as you can be when he came in. So there was no controversy about word choice then.
A couple more questions. Any other?
Does the risk of infection increase with each surgery?
No, I wouldn't say that. It increases over a period of time. Usually, infections typically don't happen in the first couple days, but then you enter a time period where infections are more common, regardless of surgery yes or surgery no.
What do you think the next step will be in his treatment right now? An additional operation? Where are we going from here?
Yes, he has additional operations that he will need before leaving the hospital.
Is there a recuperation period between now and whenever the next operation would be? I mean, I guess I don't know how aggressive you would be in sort of that timetable.
Yeah, I think that the next operation would likely take place within 48 hours, but it's a pretty dynamic decision-making process. What typically takes place when patients are severely injured like this is called damage control surgery. And what that means is that rather than trying to do everything in one operation on day one, we generally stage the operations. The first operation is dedicated usually mainly to bleeding control, and the other types of work you have to do are staged for later operations.
You said infection was the greatest risk right now, basically?
Infection is a significant risk.
Dr. Sama, did you see Congressman Scalise returning to work in his full capacity?
I think so. I think that's a good possibility.
In a year, 6 months? Hard to say.
Hard to say.
Thank you all very much.
Is he expected to make a full recovery? Is he expected to make a full recovery at the install run?
I think that an excellent recovery is a good possibility.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have the printed statement available for you here and back there, and it'll be on the table.
The head of trauma at MedStar Washington Hospital there, Dr. Jack Sava, taking questions from the media about the current condition of Representative Steve Scalise. And the headline had to be, I feel more optimistic than I did 2 days ago, that his risk of death has substantially been lowered. He talked about the fact that Scalise was awake at the scene from that baseball practice, that GOP baseball practice on Wednesday, but by the time he was transported to the hospital, he was not in that way. He described those early hours as when he arrived, he was with imminent risk of death, and you just heard me say that the headline has to be that that is substantially lowered. Let's bring in the Fox News medical correspondent, Dr. Mark Siegel, professor of medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center, and Dr. Rashini Raj, a gastroenterologist and internist also at Langone. Good to have you both. I gave the headline, Dr. Raj. What was it to you?
I think you're right. I think the fact that he's out of immediate danger of imminent death, and they did say that the bleeding was the major thing they had to control in the beginning. Sounds like an artery was probably compromised in some way. That's why he had to go to interventional radiology for a procedure that they mentioned. So in addition to the pelvic bones potentially being fractured or shattered, it sounds like arteries were affected, and that caused severe bleeding, and that has been controlled, which is great news.
Yeah. Dr. Siegel, I want to get your opinion about the big headline as well.
Yeah, I think that he was very clear, Dr. Sava, that within the first 24 to 48 hours, controlling the bleeding is number one. What he also emphasized, which we've all been wondering and worried about, is would the patient wake up? Because when you lose so much blood and you're in shock and you have a low blood pressure, is there going to be any damage to the brain? No one's talked about that yet, but he said today when they lightened the sedation, he was answering questions. How wonderful is that? He also said that he thinks he's going to walk again. I've been wondering about the nerves in the pelvis. You know, we talk about the blood supply in the pelvis, the colon, the rectum, the bladder, all rich with blood supply, the iliac arteries and veins. Obviously, as Dr. Raj just said, there was damage to the arteries and veins there, and those caused death. So they controlled the bleeding, they stabilized his vitals. He said his vitals are stable, and they preserved blood flow to the brain.
You know, it's so interesting to get this textured detail from this doctor. I know he said, well, we don't want to go too deep into this, but he really did give us a lot of information, because the line of slightly better today didn't really take us journalistically anywhere that we could go. I mean, we could sit around and talk, but we should probably do that in the green room. Right. Now we have some facts. What are the facts that you think that stand out? And what do they maybe say about how quickly he's progressed?
Well, they did mention he needed abdominal surgery. So that suggests that not only was the hip affected, bones affected, but also abdominal organs. And the fact that he will need more surgeries in the future suggests that perhaps the bowel was affected. Very often when you're doing surgery on the bowel, you do have to do it in stages. First getting rid of the immediate danger and then reattaching things potentially. So we do know a little bit more details, although he didn't specify which organs were affected. It is pretty likely that the bowel was affected.
He called it damage control surgeries at this point.
Because when you rip organs apart with a bullet, as he said today, is fragmenting. You know, these organs have to be sewn up. The blood vessels have to be sewn up. The interventional radiology procedure, stopping bleeding. And I really like what he said when he said, look, you guys out there love the term critical, you know, but for me as a physician, it's not about critical or serious. It's about the details of what's going on.
Yeah, we heard just a slight update on some of the others who were hit. One in particular was Mr. Mika, who was a lobbyist, and I don't want to go too far down the road here because we didn't get a lot of detail on him, but we know that he was permeated through the chest and the arm. And just to get a quick thought from you, Dr.
Well,
Raj.
I think what we need to focus on here is these types of bullets that we're talking about. These are not regular bullets. They're from assault rifles. They scatter and they fragment within the body and produce a lot more damage than a typical bullet would. So something in the chest could be potentially very dangerous because you can be affecting the heart, the blood vessels that are crucial around that area.
I would add to that, if it avoided the heart, lungs are things we can generally put chest tubes in and reinflate.
Oh,
so he may be in the ICU, but he may be, again, we don't know the information, but if the heart was avoided, then he may be in better shape as a result.
The way that we caught this coming live out of a commercial break, I want to regenerate now if we can, and I'm telegraphing this to the team in the booth, if we can regenerate and replay what we may have missed just joining in, because we didn't know until moments before we went to air that the chief of staff for Representative Scalise would be speaking. Let's watch this together.
My name is Brett Horton, and I'm Whip Scalise's chief of staff. I have a brief statement from Jennifer Scalise regarding Wednesday's attack. On behalf of Steve and our children, I want to thank everyone from the bottom of our hearts for the incredible amount of prayers and warm wishes that we've received since Wednesday's events. We are especially appreciative of the strong outpouring of love and support from our neighbors, friends from across Louisiana and across the country, as well as President Trump, Vice President Pence, and all of Steve's colleagues who have reached out during this challenging time. Most importantly, we are forever grateful for the heroism of Special Agents Crystal Griner and David Bailey, who saved the lives of everyone at the baseball field that morning, including Steve's. Crystal and David have been family to us for years, and we ask that you continue to pray for their full recovery. I would also like to personally thank all of the first responders who bravely assisted at the scene, as well as the entire staff of MedStar Washington Hospital Center for their continued excellent care. Our family asks that you continue to pray for Steve, Matt Micah, Zach Barth, and all of those hurt in this attack, and keep them in your thoughts and prayers during their recovery. Thank you.
So you saw Representative Scalise's chief of staff reading a statement by Jennifer Scalise. Real quickly before I let you guys go, I'm curious to know, just based on what the doctor said and how close to imminent death the representative was just a couple of days ago, what you think is maybe remarkable or stands out in terms of the care that he's gotten. Like, what did they need to do first, and what impresses you most?
Well, what impresses me is this is where you see a true trauma team really working to their best, because these are people that this is their job, to really treat an acute situation situation where there is imminent death and do very complicated surgeries very quickly because they are really running against time when you're talking about someone who's bleeding out potentially, and they did a fantastic job. However, they're not out of the woods yet, and when you're in a hospital, you can get infections, you can get blood clots when you're immobilized, you know, particularly from a hip injury. So that's why, you know, he said he's a bit pessimistic, and that's not because they don't have fantastic care, but a lot of things can happen in the next couple of weeks. So.
Yeah, in fact, he said, Dr. Siegel, he's not doing his job if he's not pessimistic. A last thought from you.
Right, because infections can creep in right now. But and I agree with Dr. Raj. It was about the speed and the great skill that they showed. I want to add the word courage here because Chief of Staff said courage. It's courage that aids in recovery, and Representative Scalise is recovering largely and partly because of his own courage and heroism.
Wow. Dr. Siegel, Dr. Raj, great to have you both. You know, you heard his chief of staff talking about the response from President Trump. Scalise and President Trump have forged a close relationship, working together on both the House health care bill and tax reform, and so we know that there is a closeness there that is worth noting as well. President Trump, as we move along now, is rolling back part of President Obama's legacy and policy on Cuba. The changes include bringing back restrictions on Americans traveling to that communist nation. We'll debate both political sides and touch on some other political news that's being made on this Friday ahead on the Fox News deck. Stay close.